Hello, everybody. I'm MomoTheMonster. Welcome to the last talk of the first day of TLX. Want to just, first of all, say thank you to Orals and everybody else who has helped to put this together. I know it takes a lot to put on an event, get speakers lined up. The speed at which you've all put this together is honestly amazing. So I'm stoked to see this and to be here for it and to get to talk as part of it. So I am on the VRChat development team. I joined in March of this year, so I'm still pretty new. A lot of you have actually been a part of VRChat longer than I have. So I mostly work on the SDK team, and it's a big responsibility to be helping to shape and craft, the abilities that you all have to make things in VRChat in the current versions and in future versions. So it's amazing to see what you've created here and to get this real-time feedback. I definitely recognize a lot of you from various Discords. Really cool to get to be here in the world with you. So without further ado, I'll start you off with Cinemachine and Timeline in VRChat. This will be a pretty short talk and a bit rapid fire. I'm going to start with a short video. I will warn you, I think it's a little loud, so maybe you want to have a finger on your volume as we get this next one going. So this was the first world that I made to explore what we could do with Cinemachine and Timeline together, since I had recently just added it, or rather started working on that world as I was getting Cinemachine all integrated into Udon and figuring out what we could do. So the idea behind this world was to enable people to make a little music video. I found a track by this artist SRO, who I follow and who happenstance actually is a VRChat user, and was stoked to see their music in a world. But yeah, the idea was something fun and short that you could do, and was really set up to make a video of yourself to kind of celebrate the song, make a little music video. So I'm going to take you a little bit through how the world is put together. It's actually really light on the code part. So if you're not really in depth with Udon, I think you'll be able to follow along. But there are a lot of videos that I recorded of me kind of going through things. It's going to go fast. I'll try and keep up. So here we go. So this is kind of the basic setup that I had for the world. We have a bunch of virtual cameras. They all feed into a Cinemachine brain. That brain then outputs to a render texture, which just goes on a screen space canvas. So it totally takes over your screen. If you're in VR, that'll basically be your, you'll be able to see the world, and that will show up kind of on your desktop display. If you're on desktop, it'll actually take over your whole thing and make it a little hard to run around the world. But that's the best way I could find at the moment to actually enable like the third-person recording there. Let's see, we got this one twice. Cool. So, oh boy, it's hard to see it there, so I'm gonna have to turn around a little bit. So I'm showing off the world. Maybe I'll just get a little close here. Cool, so we've got the brain here, and then we have the 4 virtual cameras that feed into the brain. So you can see the brain itself is just a normal camera that feeds into a render texture, the Cinema RT there. And then we have a pretty bog standard Cinemachine brain component on that. I've got the screen space canvas with just a raw image that knows that render texture. So that's what actually takes over the screen there, and we just toggle that on when we start. So we'll take a look at the cameras. This is what a virtual camera looks like. You can hit solo. Even when the scene isn't running, you can see through the camera. It'll even do its little wiggle that I have on it. So you can pick all your different cameras and kind of place them around the scene. So here, I'm just kind of going through the 4 cameras that I have set up. Third one here is off to the left, kind of getting that shot of the character, the little standing character that I have. And the last camera is static, just set on the phone to give those easy cutaway shots to the phone. So each virtual camera has priority. This is how you can actually affect it without using solo. If you wanted to change a camera with Udon, if you set its priority lower than the other cameras, it will disappear. If you set it above the other cameras, then the brain knows to switch to that camera. So here you can see I go below and above, and that camera will sort of pop to the top of the stack and then back down again. So that is exposed to Udon if you want to change cameras that way outside of the timeline. Priority is your friend. And we have, what is that there? The timeline, yeah. So a lot of things going on in the timeline here. And I'll get into that in detail, but first I'm just going to show you how to actually make a timeline from scratch. So I just put in an empty object, zero it out, and I'm just going to add a playable director component. This is what actually controls the timeline, kind of like what an animator controller is to animations. Create a new clip, again, really similar to an animator. And you can see by default it actually has a little animator on it. We'll toss that away, we don't need it. We just want to control the Cinemachine brain to start. So you drag a Cinemachine brain onto a timeline, you can create a Cinemachine track, and then just drag and drop your virtual cameras into the track. And that will have the timeline swap to that camera. So you can see here, I'm just going to lay in each camera, and if I move the playhead around, it's going to cut from camera 1 to camera 2, etc. So I can just move along, dropping in the cameras that I want, timing them out. Let's see, that's right. I can use this guy here, my little invisible one. That's a little more natural. Cool. So you can also copy paste directly in the timeline itself. This helps if you want a shorter clip, because by default, Cinemachine virtual cameras will be these kind of long clips, and I wanted a bunch of short ones. So once you have your clips laid out, you can actually just drag the end of the clip to create a transition. They make it really easy, and they'll actually kind of tween between the positions and rotations of your different cameras, which is really cool. It's not just like a crossfade. So this is how you can get your, this is how we get all the transitions from one camera to another all together in the timeline. So here, if we have play on awake on, all we'd have to do is start the scene, and it would start playing through our timeline and automatically switching and blending between all of our cameras, along with whatever music or whatever other dialogue cutscene we have going on. Cool. So let's take a look next at look at and following objects with the camera. What's really cool is we actually have a live example of this, because I'm pretty sure. Oh, I guess that is showing up on the stream. Oh, great. Okay. But this is, I imagine this is what's going on here, because you can see as I move around, the camera's following me. Oral's, is this Cinemachine doing a follow?
Yes.
Or look at? Awesome. Yeah. So there we go. So you can see wherever I move, it's following along with me. So I'll show you how I'm doing this. Maybe very similar to how Oral's put this together. Of course, now I blocked my thing. Let's see, that works there. Oh no, colliders, come on. There we go.
Sometimes it takes a couple of clicks.
Cool. So here you can see I've set the follow and the look at for each camera to point at this little follow target, follow object, which for right now I've just placed in my stand-in's head. I'll show you later how we actually use Udon to move that around and follow the player. But for now, all you need to know is in each virtual camera, you can set a follow and a look at. I'm actually just using the look at. You can see we have the aim part of the Cinemachine virtual camera. So if you tell it to aim at the follow object, then you can set all these parameters and it will kind of smoothly move around the scene, but stay aimed at your target. So here I'm moving the camera and not the person, but you can see it kind of smoothly tries to keep that follow object in the center of its view. And you can do things like have dead zone so it doesn't always move around. It's really powerful. I recommend playing around with it. No scripting needed. Everything we've done so far actually has just been component based, just dropping things into slots. So I do have a little bit of noise on here. This is what gives it like the drift. There's a bunch of built-in profiles you can use. You can also create your own profile. And here I'm upping the amplitude, so it's going to move more along this little noise profile. You can also change the frequency, and it'll move more often. So here's how you can get kind of the feelings of like a shaky handy cam or like a really smooth, nice steady cam feel going on. So tiny, not blocking view. Okay, cool. So our second camera, we're also doing a look at that follow object. This one, I've actually got the damping a little higher, so this one will follow behind, and I've offset it, so you can see the object doesn't always stay right in the center. It'll actually be a little bit off to the side. You don't always have to have things centered. If you know anything about cinematography and rule of thirds, it can be really nice to actually have your objects or your subjects a little bit off to the side of the frame. Our next one here, shooting from the other side of the desk where the little reception plaque is, but also doing a look at with a little bit of damping. That one around. I played around with having receptionists like really front and center, but it really limited where the player could move, so decided to pull that back a little bit. And the final one we have is the phone camera. This one isn't doing any follow or look at because it just sits right on the phone, so I can always cut to the phone to match the music. So focus object has an Udon graph on it. This will be our first look at the Udon inside. This is actually a really simple one. I'm just doing in late update. I ask, is this player the owner of this object? And if they are, I want to set the position and rotation of the follow object from the local player's tracking data head position and rotation. So get that position rotation, apply it to the follow object every late update. It's more often than we need, but it works well enough. And then we're off to the races. All right, I'm going to take you through the timeline now, the more complicated one with all the steps, and try to quickly explain what happens on each layer. Sure, we're up and running there. All right. So yeah, let's take a look at these layers. Got plenty of them. So the first one is the audio, really important since I was basically making a music video here. So I have the audio source as a child of the timeline. It doesn't really matter. I think I'm doing 2D or pretty central here. So it targets that audio source, and then I just drag and drop the audio clip into there and turn on audio scrubbing. That's off by default, but if you have it on, then you can scrub through your timeline and hear where you are in the song. This is how I timed out all the first camera changes to like the big beats in the music. Like find that first beat, set the endpoint of that clip, and then I'd be lined up. You can also turn on the waveform viewing on and off depending on if it's bogging down your system a bit. So next up, we've got the big screen. So this doesn't show up in the recording, but it does show locally and kind of shows the output of that big of your whole virtual camera system. So the way this works is really simple. I just have the object in the scene, And then I actually recorded the keyframes directly into the timeline. So when you're working with timeline, you can use existing animations, or you can actually just like inject your keyframes right in the timeline. So I turned on recording here to show how that works. So with recording on, it's really similar to live recording and animation. I just set a start and end keyframe just by moving it around in the scene. So just set the start. I'll move the end one. No, let's not go up and down. Let's go to the left there. There you go. So now I've got start and end. By default, Unity is going to fill that whole area. So I will I will move it around a little bit, press the wrong thing, select it again, and then squeeze it to just match the right in and out points. And now you can see I have these keyframes recorded just directly into my timeline. So if it isn't an animation I need to reuse over and over, I don't need to like make it, save it, etc. I can just put those keyframes right on the timeline, like I'm making a cutscene. It makes it really easy to do little one-offs. So there we go. Now, when you start the timeline, that screen's going to roll down from the ceiling and show you what's on the screen. I do the same thing right at the end. At the end of the song, we roll it back up into the ceiling. So I could have made a second clip, I could have reversed the keyframes, but instead, I just recorded those new keyframes right into the timeline. The next one down, we kind of went over already. It's mostly the camera switching, so I just dropped in all the cameras, switching to the beats. Once I had them where I wanted eventually, I stretched those transitions in and out in order to make a match. Here I'm going to show one particular transition that was like really meant to match one of the sounds in the song. And you can zoom in and just like listen to that sound, drag your transition around, decide, oh, maybe I want it to really stop at that hit. There we go. So now it like kind of freezes in place right when that hit happens. I find that Unity's actually created a really like hands-on system here that I like for being able to do things, especially when you want to like hit certain sounds. Next one down is the screen space canvas. So that's a really simple one. This uses an activator track. So activator is just object on, object off. If it's there in the timeline, it's object on. So basically, as soon as you start the timeline, bam, we got a screen space canvas that's going to take over everything. This next one here is how I actually do the phone things lighting up, the little keypad. So this one, I did make an animation and just timed it out to the music, just turning on and off these little sprites. I think knowing what I do now, I would have done this directly into the timeline. I didn't know how to do it when I actually made that animation, so I wound up making this kind of complicated separate one-off animation. But you know, learn as you go. You can see here the little activator tracks down below. Turn on the poor performance sprites. Those are just other little activator tracks. I just dropped them in, listened to the music, to show them up on the phone. So this next section here, I believe we're taking a look at the phone ringing. So when the ring sound happened in the song, I wanted the phone to jiggle around a little bit. So for this one, I also did a record directly into the timeline. Basically just set two keyframes, like left and right, and then copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, until it was all full. And this gives the feeling of like the phone kind of ringing and jingling around like it might do in a cartoon. And then here, just another activator track turns on the Alan Rickman sprite. I actually wound up going a little crazy. Whenever I would place the sprite in the scene, it looked right, and then whenever I played the animation, it was wrong. It was because the animation was stopping on the wrong frame, so Alan Rickman would always be offset. I finally realized that, fixed the keyframe, and then it was all good. So taking a look at the fader, this is how we actually show the credits at the end. It's just another couple objects on the canvas. So it's on the same canvas as the whole thing, but it's actually higher in priority, meaning it's lower on the inspector than the base video. So in this way, we can kind of bring up the vignette and a couple of text fields that we automatically filled in using just a little bit of Udon when someone pushes play. And we have the text fields, we have the icon, etc. So there is that whole system just kind of coming on. And just how to activate the main object and all of its child objects, of course, follow right along. Here we have the start and stop buttons. So these are really important because I wanted this to be the same for everybody. So again, just popped them in the timeline. As soon as we start, we turn off the start button and turn on the stop button, and then vice versa when we get to the end. And that way, you start the timeline, we can put away those buttons and make sure that every local player can actually stop if they don't want to be watching the music video anymore. The last part, the very last layer we have, again, is not shown in the video. It's only visible to the player themselves. But it's little camera prefabs that show the player which camera is actually visible at any given point. So I did this just with a couple prefabs that just turn on one by one. And I actually did reuse that render texture in the little preview window, so you can kind of see it on the camera just for that little bit of realism in there. So this way, you don't get a warning, but at least you can see, okay, now it's filming the phone, now it's filming me from here, and I can like mug into this camera, now I can like mug into this camera. It helps the person doing the performance know like where they should be looking. Otherwise, it's pretty unclear. Yeah, so there you can see it coming up. And this control track here is cool. It's like an activator, but it lets you use multiple objects. So I could drop all the prefabs I wanted, and it would just hide and show each one based on where in the timeline we were. All right, interactivity. There's not a whole lot, but we do include both start and stop. Wow. So we have here the start button and stop button, and they just trigger play local and stop local events in Udon. So that's all that's actually wired up there. And then the main timeline object has our Udon graph that does the rest of the lifting. So this is that graph. There's not actually too much going on. When you press play, it does this play local. And what that's going to do is it makes the person who pressed the button into the owner of the object. And then, getting ahead of it a little bit. All right, so focus object, set the owner, and then it's going to say, hey, tell everybody now to run the play event. So now everybody, including the person who just pressed the object, gets play. It tells the timeline to start playing, and it sets the text on that title card at the end to the owner of the object. So that way the person who pressed play is always the one whose name goes on the title card. If you never use string format, this is so handy. You type in what you want and then curly brackets, and you can inject other objects, and they'll appear in the string for you. Especially for debugging, it's a must to utilize your string format. Stop is local, so if someone pressed start, you can press stop whenever you want. It's going to stop your own timeline, not everybody else's, and then just for you, it will go ahead and show the start button and hide the stop button. Mostly we had controlled that with the timeline, but of course if you stop the timeline, you didn't get to the part of the timeline that swaps your buttons back. So it'll go ahead and swap that back for you. All right, that is what we've got. So now I'm happy to open it up. I can take questions about this. Also happy if you have other questions about SDK and Udon stuff, I'll tell you whatever I can tell you.
Hey, Momo. At some point in the beginning of the video, you showed transition for in and out. I saw that you have a specific curve, but I only saw one. Are you able to have multiple curves, or are you able to edit the curve specifically in the timeline?
So I don't know. When you're using the timeline, if you're using it programmatically, in the Cinemachine brain itself, you can set custom curves that will be used to blend between your clips. And then if you say, hey, change to this camera, it will use that curve. I don't know if there's a way to use that in Timeline. I didn't try that, but I would like to know as well.
So in the brain, there was, I guess, a curve for each in and out. So are you able to customize within that?
There is a default. So in the Cinemachine brain, you can set what the default curve is for when you switch between cameras. I'm sure there are ways to customize when you want to blend to another camera itself. I don't know if there's a way to get to that from what we have exposed with Udon right now.
Okay. Thank you.
So when you dragged a virtual camera into the timeline on the brain track, what data is actually being recorded there? How does the timeline know that that's a Cinemachine camera? How does that whole, and can we do any of that kind of thing in Udon?
Yes, so I'll take the second part first. Can you do it in Udon? Yes. So if you want to change cameras in Udon, the best way to do it is you have your virtual cameras, you have your brain. If you change the priority of any camera, I've only exposed a tiny little bit of Cinemachine so far, just to keep our QA, the amount we needed to test really small to start. But you have access to get and set priority. So let's say all of my virtual cameras by default are set to priority 10. So by default, it'll just take the top one in the stack. But if you say, hey, take virtual camera 1, set its priority to 11, that one is now what will show up in your Cinemachine brain. Same, you can lower the priority for that camera and it'll figure it out. There's also some super cool ones where it'll automatically pick whichever camera has the best shot of a player. All that stuff is actually just doable with components. To the first part of that, how does it know what to do in the timeline? I assume under the hood, it's basically just doing that same priority stuff. But the shorter answer of that is I don't really know. I just know that it works. If you have a brain, you can drag any of its virtual cameras in, and at that point of your timeline, it will switch to that one specifically. It'll override anything else you have in your scene.
Okay, it kind of makes sense. I'll have to play with it myself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little quiet, but.
Okay, yeah, sorry for that. Here, I connect.
Oh, now you're gone entirely. You just changed it.
Oh, is he muted?
Goodbye, son. Go back to what you had. I think was good.
Unfortunately. Shaggy, come back to us.
Shaggy, come back.
Can't believe him died.
Shaggy's fucking dead. He got shagged in the alley.
We still don't hear you, by the way.
What unfortunate fate.
Yeah.
The system is too strong, or
Saw something for a second. Oh, there we go. Wait.
I can hear background noise now.
I heard the washer.
try checking.
I have so many audio.
Oh, there we go. That one was good.
You were there for a second.
Alright, cool. Webcam mic it is. Jesus.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm sure this is absolutely possible, and I'm sure it's a very simple question to answer, but is there a way to set it up with the actual render canvas, render texture for a multicam layout? Because I come from a video production background that I do a lot of multicam productions, and if I was able to develop a toolkit that you can basically, players inside VRChat can set up a multicam recording setup and hit go, and it will switch, like for a music video, for instance, like what you did, and then you could effectively put your VRChat window on a 4K display and then record that and then do a multicam edit afterwards.
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely possible. The one thing that's tricky I'm trying to think about is like actually seeing the point of view of each camera, because ideally like you want to see them all laid out, right, and go like camera one, camera two, camera one. I don't know if you can see through each camera. I'm sure there's a way to do it. The setup that I have is basically feeding ultimately just to one at any given point. You'd have to basically like render each one out separately. But absolutely, you could have, if you knew where those cameras were, like you have, I got this nice wide shot. I have, one in front, one behind. I have a super close up. Then you could easily just have a console that basically just sets the priority to like set camera 1 to priority 100 and then back, set camera 2 to priority 100, and it would swap to that one. So that's all possible.
Okay.
We would need to play around with it to see how we get the nice preview in order to see all of them. Like I know.
So in that case, would you be able to set up an interface inside VRChat that you could actually switch what camera is active?
No, we don't.
Yeah.
No, I mean not.
Okay.
Yeah, so that would just be using the priority on a virtual camera. You set the
Okay, so
priority
you're just
high,
using Udon to
that's the
set
active
priority,
one.
and then it would. Okay.
I'm sure you could do.
In which case, you wouldn't even really need to use timeline. It would just be a really long timeline, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it would be no timeline at all. So Cinemachine does not rely on timeline. It's a good way to do like cutscene or music video type stuff for this, but totally you could just have it real time. You just have virtual cameras and you play with their priorities. That's going to cut between them automatically. You could have your cameras even following the players around physically in the world, like a third-person game, and swap in between them. Yeah, that's all doable without timeline.
I had no idea this existed. I'm hyped.
That's why I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's all I had. Thank you.
Cool. Logan, hit me.
All the Udon noise.
Alright, so you said we have start and stop right now. I know nothing about Cinemachine, and I know that it was really hard for me to learn how to set time of a current animation clip. Can we set time of where the timeline is at runtime? Like, let's say I have a 5-minute thing. Okay.
So we have
is
exposed.
That obvious?
Yeah, it's get time set time on the I think it's on the Playable Director, so that's like the controller of your timeline asset. So yeah, you can totally do that. If you wanted to do sync that way, I basically I got good enough sync here just by using a one network event. You could totally do it like TCL did the example video prefab, where you regularly check your time versus the master owner time, and jump if you're too far off, that whole deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, first of all, super excited about Cinemachine, and as soon as I saw that it was allowed with Udon now, I instantly started working on my cinematic director, and obviously I was a little disappointed to see that you're not allowed to control lens, the body, the aim, the noise. Is there any kind of estimate when that will be available through Udon?
I can't give you a time, but I can tell you it's definitely on the plate. Again, I kept the scope super small just to make sure to okay, we can just get this out and then we can work on expanding it. Those in particular, Unity has a really funky way that they put those together, so I need to expose a whole host of weird classes and enums in order to get them, but totally we'll get those in.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, because someone pointed it out, I have to ask, does Cinemachine work in SDK2 worlds at all?
Sure. Yeah, so Cinemachine has been whitelisted for VRChat in general, and you could do most of what I did in this video. You saw Udon was only used for a couple things. It was used to have the follow object follow the player around, which I now know Cyan can do in SDK2. So if you set that object as the target of any virtual camera, it will work just the same in SDK2 as it did here in Udon. The only other thing would be starting and stopping the Playable Director, which, again, those aren't exposed anywhere, and we're probably not adding triggers for them, but if you left play on awake on, I'm sure you could enable that object in order to start it up at least at the time that you wanted.
Maybe UI buttons.
Time to see what UI buttons can do for Cinemachine.
Yeah.
But I have a very old world that has a very complex cutscene in it. Doing it manually was a big pain, and I would love to redo that world and use Cinemachine to do the NPC animations and sound effects and everything. So that is very exciting that I don't have to port the entire project over to Udon to make that work, for example. So yay, thank you.
Awesome, give it a shot.
came back.
Last one?
Yeah, I came back a bit late into the talk, but I was wondering if it was possible, maybe it's simple, but can you have multiple brains? And if so, can you enable, disable brains at runtime?
I don't know. I'd only use the one brain. Mostly I've seen people just use one brain. I don't know how, because a brain, like, it doesn't specifically say which virtual cameras feed into it. I don't know how that would work, other than you could have, like, groups of virtual cameras that you, like, turn off all of these, turn on all of these. And maybe that way you would have the same brain, but have different...
I have an answer for that.
Oh yeah, please.
Yeah, basically, as you can see here, you have two. This is two completely different brains running at the same time. Basically, how Unity did it is you have each brain will only take cameras on the same layer. So only the virtual cameras that are on the same layer are considered, and it's very important that your camera that actually renders things in that virtual camera does only, basically, if you have like one layer, like layer A and layer B, and your cameras on layer A should not render layer B, because then they will be captured by the other brain. So it's like this weird inverse system that you have to have both brains on different layers and make sure the cameras don't render each other's layers, because then it will not work. So yeah, here's your answer. You don't have to disable, enable anything, but it's kind of annoying because layers are limited and you have to make sure that things don't render each other. But yeah, that's basically how to make it.